The legendary Merle Haggard once famously claimed that he just wanted to pick his guitar and hang out with the band, insisting he couldn't care less about the spotlight. But let's be real, Merle didn't exactly get a vote on that one, because when you possess that level of raw talent, global stardom hunts you down, whether you try to hide or not. Now, you have probably scrolled past those sensational headlines screaming that Willie Nelson has drafted a secret hit list of enemies. But hold your horses, because Willie doesn't waste time on petty hate lists. No, the red-headed stranger deals in diagnosis, not drama. We're about to rank the 6 distinct faces of the corporate monster that thrives on manufacturing outrage while diluting the art form. And take my word for it, when we get to our runner-up at number 2, you will see it's not even a specific villain. It is a glaring warning sign for the entire industry. However, if we really want to comprehend the bad actors of today, we have to rewind to the original makeover that taught Nashville a very profitable lesson. Authenticity can be engineered. Why does this narrative keep growing? Well, we need to tackle the massive elephant standing right in the middle of the recording studio. If you have spent 5 minutes online lately, you have undoubtedly seen the rumours floating around that Willie Nelson has finally snapped. The gossip rags claim he is naming and shaming the specific artists he believes are single-handedly ruining the genre. It makes for a spicy click, doesn't it? But let's look at the facts. If you analyse the last 70 years of this icon's career, that sort of behaviour simply doesn't track with his character. We are talking about the visionary who literally kicked open the doors for the outlaw movement just to ensure everyone had a fair seat at the table. He is the ultimate bridge builder of American sound. He is certainly not the type to sit in the back of his tour bus scribbling names in a burn book like a high schooler. Yet these fabricated feuds catch fire and spread across social media like wildfire. Oh, why are we so obsessed with this idea? It is because we are all desperate for a convenient scapegoat to explain why modern country radio feels so foreign compared to the classics we grew up on. We want to believe there is one specific bad apple we can point a finger at, but hold on, because the reality is significantly more complex than that. While the existence of a personal hit list is total fiction, Willie Nelson has been incredibly vocal about a trend he finds legitimately threatening to the music he built his life around. In his recent media appearances, including that massive retrospective deep dive published in The New Yorker, or his candid 2026 interviews with GQ Willie, circles back to one specific description: watered down. Let that phrase sink in for a moment. Here is a legend pushing 93 years old, and his mind is still sharp enough to identify the corporate cancer that is eating away at the heart of Music Row. He doesn't label individual singers as evil, rather he views the industry itself as a factory that strips away the human soul and replaces it with synthetic filler. And this is where things get fascinating for our deep dive investigation today. Since Willie is too classy to give you a clickbait roster of enemies, we decided to do the dirty work and dig through the files ourselves. We are going to expose the 6 most ruthless faces of that corporate machine, but first, let's establish some strict ground rules right now. When we use the word evil in this video, we are not talking about tabloid drama or who was rude to a waiter at a steakhouse. We are analysing systemic, repeatable patterns of industry behaviour. We are spotlighting the precise moments where the machine chose revenue over people, or where an artist became a pawn in a system that monetizes division rather than quality songwriting. Every single entry on this ranking from number 6 all the way down to number 1 is supported by hard evidence, specific dates and documented events. We are dealing in receipts, not rumours. We are approaching this with the rigour of a true crime documentary for the music business. We are tracking the mutation of the genre from the gritty, dusty soul of the 1970s outlaws to the polished, polarised product dominating the airwaves in 2026. If Willie Nelson himself is calling the mainstream scene watered down, we have to ask a hard question. What is the genre actually sacrificing? Is it the emotional honesty, or is it the rough edges that made it feel real? And listen, you need to stick around for when we hit the number 2 spot. It will genuinely shock you because it does not involve an artist doing anything malicious at all. Instead, it is the chilling story of how the industry attempted to completely erase a group of artists just to send a message to everyone else in town. but to truly grasp how we arrived at this fractured state. And to understand the inner workings of the machine, we need to travel back in time. We need to examine the very first instance where Nashville realised it could scrub the grit off the music dresser in a tuxedo and sell it back to the masses as an upgrade. The reward loop. Let's pinpoint the exact second the industry learned that authenticity was just another variable they could manipulate. How Chet Atkins helped invent Safe Country. To identify the first culprit on our list, we have to rewind the clock to the late 1950s. And this might mess with your perception because our number 6 entry is actually one of the most revered icons in the history of the guitar. I am referring to the legendary Chet Atkins. Now, before you throw your phone across the room, remember the criteria we set. We are critiquing the machine, not the talent. Chet was a musical genius and a gentleman, but he was also the chief architect of the so-called Nashville sound. And that specific innovation is exactly where the corporate takeover of the soul of the music began to plant its roots. Here is the context you need. Back in 1957, the country genre was practically on life support. Elvis Presley and the rock and roll tidal wave were inhaling every dollar in the business. The traditional hillbilly sound was viewed as archaic, dusty, and worst of all, for the executives, unsellable. Chet Atkins and a producer named Owen Bradley came to a realisation: if country music was going to live to fight another day, it had to cross enemy lines and hit the pop charts. The industry bigwigs decided the genre needed to be palatable for folks who had never stepped foot in a barn. Consequently, they executed a drastic manoeuvre. They literally began surgically removing the country essence from country music itself. Out went the fiddles, deemed too backwards for mass appeal, and the steel guitars were buried 6 feet under because their wailing was considered just too damn depressing. In their place, executives introduced lush orchestral strings, slick backing vocalists like the Jordanaires, and a production value that sparkled like a brand new Cadillac rolling off the assembly line. Let that sink in for a moment. This wasn't merely an artistic evolution. It was a frigid, calculated corporate strategy designed to maximise revenue. Digging into the archives reveals this as the precise instant Nashville realised that authenticity wasn't something you felt, it was something you could manufacture in a boardroom. The powers that be decided they no longer required that gritty, whiskey-drenched truthfulness that defined the sound of the 1940s. What they desperately craved was a sanitised, risk-free version of country. They required a commodity that wouldn't ruffle the feathers of the suburban homemakers driving record sales back in 1962. But hold on, the story takes an even stranger turn. This slick manufactured approach established the industry's original blueprint for gatekeeping. Suddenly, if an artist didn't squeeze into this glossy mould, they were effectively blacklisted from the airwaves. That precise dynamic explains why a legend like Willie Nelson faced such an uphill battle during the initial phase of his career. The Nashville machine attempted to package him as a clean-shaven pop crooner, stuffing him into stiff suits and burying his unique vocals under suffocating layers of violin tracks. Willie was effectively forbidden from being his true self because the corporate engine, partly constructed by Chet, had zero tolerance for rough edges. So when Willie reflects on the current state of the genre in 2026 and labels it diluted, he isn't merely gripping about today's radio hits. He is responding to a rigorous standard cemented over 6 decades ago, having witnessed with his own eyes how the powers that be valued glossy perfection over genuine soul. We are talking about a mechanism where decisions made in the mixing booth dictate the entire identity of the artist. To achieve stardom, you are forced to adhere to the unwritten laws of the industry, a system specifically engineered to remain as harmless and vanilla as humanly possible. This begs the question: when you listen to that classic Nashville sheen, do you hear professional excellence or do you hear the sound of corporate control? Is that sweeping string section merely a lovely musical accompaniment, or is it a tool used to suffocate the gritty reality of actual life? However, here is the kicker: once the Nashville executives realised they could market a specific vibe by erasing the flaws, they became addicted to the financial windfall. Yet as time marched on, they stumbled upon a strategy even more profitable than simply peddling a sanitised audio experience. They realised that if they possessed the power to reconstruct an artist's sonic profile, they could ultimately manipulate the message being delivered to the masses. The strategy shifted from marketing a feeling to marketing a flag, which brings us squarely to our number 5 pick, Toby Keith. While our previous entry focused on softening the edges of the music, this next chapter is all about honing the message into a sharp political weapon. We need to rewind to the early 2000s. Visualise the scene in late 2001 where the debris from the Twin Towers has barely settled on the ground. The entire nation felt like an exposed nerve ending, and every singer in Music City was scrambling to decide what to articulate or if staying silent was the safer bet. Into this tension steps Toby Keith, frantically jotting down lyrics on the cardboard back of a shipping box while riding his tour bus. Those scribbles evolved into Courtesy of the Red, White and Blue, a track that quite frankly permanently altered the financial motivations behind country music. Now let's be clear here, I am not insinuating that Toby Keith was some sort of villain. By all reports, he was a staunch advocate for the military and a man who genuinely stood behind every word he sang. However, the industry machine spotted something in that anthem. They couldn't ignore a direct express lane to astronomical profits, fueled by righteous indignation. Time magazine later conducted an intriguing retrospective on how this single track became a cultural flashpoint. It wasn't merely a chart topper. It served as a litmus test, proving to the industry for the first time that by wrapping aggression in the stars and stripes, they acquired more than just a casual audience. They recruited loyal foot soldiers, discovering they could monetize the US versus them mentality on a scale previously unimaginable. But hold your horses, because the situation becomes even more bizarre. This period effectively conditioned the country music fan base to view any difference of opinion as an act of literal treason. It fostered a toxic climate where if you weren't waving your banner as vigorously as your neighbour, you were deemed a suspect. The industry didn't just allow Toby to perform his piece. They harnessed that volatile energy to establish a fresh set of commandments for everyone else, realising country had transcended being just a musical genre. It had morphed into a rigid cultural identity that required constant proof of allegiance. And get this, once that Pandora's box was cracked open, there was no shutting it. The executives understood that keeping the national wound festering was fantastic for the bottom line. Angry people remain engaged, and engaged people purchase albums and concert passes to publicly demonstrate which team they support. This mechanism creates a feedback loop that rewards the loudest, most belligerent voices in the room, while effectively gagging anyone daring to ask a tough question. We will actually witness the catastrophic fallout of this shift in our number 2 spot coming up, but for the moment, consider the impact this had on the art of songwriting itself. It forcibly moved the spotlight away from universal tales of the human condition, the very essence Willie Nelson lives and breathes for. Instead, the focus landed squarely on highly specific, electrically charged political manifestos designed to divide. Somewhere along the line, the genre forgot its golden rule about 3 chords and the truth. Instead, it pivoted to a ruthless new business model, 3 chords and a hit list of enemies to target. You have to ask yourself, looking back at that patriotism boom in the 2002 era, was that music actually stitching the country back together? Or was it just boot camp conditioning us to choose a team for profit? Because the second the record executives figured out that fury pays the bills better than feelings, they quit hunting for the next Willie Nelson or Johnny Cash. Instead, they started headhunting for the next massive viral train wreck that would dominate the news cycle. Here is the kicker. More than 2 decades down the road, that blueprint didn't disappear. It actually mutated into something far more slick and calculated. Now, we have moved way past the days of simple starry-eyed anthems into an era of weaponized content that is much more deliberate. These singles and videos are engineered in a lab to detonate on your timeline. Nashville figured out that if they could monetize a flag, they could monetize an entire culture war. Which brings us to number 4 on our countdown, the calculated chaos of Jason Aldean's Small Town Menace. Back in July of 2023, Aldean dropped the visual for Try That in a small town, and it took less than 48 hours for it to stop being a melody and start being a battlefield. It effectively operated as a social media pipe bomb. But let's peel back the layers and look at the mechanics of how this actually played out from a technical standpoint. We already witnessed how Toby Keith set the stage for patriotic cash grabs back in the early 2000s, but Aldean's team rolled out the 2.0 software update. They manufactured a product perfectly tuned for the infinite scroll era where the argument itself serves as the entire marketing budget. The backlash was so immediate that CMT literally scrubbed the video from their rotation after just 3 days of airtime. Deep dives from major outlets like Reuters and Entertainment Weekly highlighted exactly why viewers were getting chills, and it wasn't just about the words he was singing. The entire video was shot in front of the Maury County Courthouse in Columbia, Tennessee. To the casual observer, it just looks like a classic building with white columns. But for anyone familiar with the dark local history, that spot is infamous. It is the exact site where an 18-year-old black man named Henry Choate was dragged and lynched by a mob in 1927. Critics and historians argued that staging a video at a landmark known for such specific racial violence to accompany a track glorifying vigilante justice feels a little too specific to be an accidental location scouting error. They viewed it as a deliberate poke at the bear designed to ignite a very specific firestorm. And this is where you have to study the PR response because it was honestly a masterclass in manipulation. The damage control followed a cycle we have watched play out dozens of times in the modern era. Step 1, you vehemently deny any racial undertones whatsoever. You stick rigidly to the talking points about wholesome small-town community values. Step 2, you flip the script to the cancel culture defense. You claim you are being bullied by city elites who just don't get how real Americans live. Finally, you wrap the entire toxic mess in a vague, shiny wrapper of national unity. And here is the scary part. It worked exactly how the algorithm is designed to work. When the network pulled the video, the song didn't disappear into the ether. It exploded. It actually shot all the way to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, which is insane when you realise half the buyers probably didn't even care about the hook. They were downloading it as a digital political lawn sign. They were spending money just to stick it to the people they were fighting with in the comment sections online. This is the definition of rage marketing. The industry machine has realised that if they can get you mad enough to argue, they don't even need to hire a radio promoter anymore. Your outrage is their free distribution network. Every time someone retweeted a clip to slam the imagery, they were inadvertently serving the song to 10 other people who were ready to support it out of spite. It is a closed loop where the controversy is the campaign and the actual music is barely even the product anymore. The real product on sale is the dopamine hit of feeling like you are right and everyone else is wrong. Just let that sink in for a moment and think about the implications. We have drifted from the Nashville sound, which aimed to smooth out the rough edges, to a system that intentionally hunts for the sharpest, most divisive, jagged edges, because that is what keeps the engagement metrics climbing. It makes the art itself feel like a secondary concern. So I have to ask you, when the machine operates like this, who is really getting played? Is it the die-hard fans who believe they are protecting their heritage and way of life? Is it the critics who think they are blocking hate speech, or is it just everyone else caught in the crossfire while the executives watch the revenue graph go up? Because if you are under the impression that a massive public backlash is supposed to kill a career in 2026, you are living in the past. You just wait until you see the absolute chaos surrounding our #3 pick. We're about to break down a moment where a superstar was caught on tape doing something that by all rights should have been a career death sentence. But instead of his empire crumbling, his streaming numbers did something that defied all logic and proved that the machine has completely rewritten the laws of accountability. #3, Morgan Wallen and the controversy reward loop. It goes back to February 2nd, 2021. Wallen is arriving home after a rowdy night out in Nashville, and a neighbour's doorbell camera captures him shouting a racial slur in the driveway. Within 24 hours, the industry hammer dropped faster than we have ever witnessed. His label, Big Loud Records, immediately suspended his contract indefinitely. Media titans like iHeart and Cumulus, the gatekeepers of what plays in your truck, scrubbed him from the playlist of over 400 stations instantly. Major players like CMT and even the Academy of Country Music didn't just sideline him. They practically scrubbed his name from their entire digital and broadcast existence. Back in the day, a move like that would have been the final nail in the coffin, a total career wipeout that you simply do not come back from. However, this is the precise moment where the narrative takes a sharp left turn into something truly bizarre and utterly captivating. While the corporate machine was working overtime to bury him under a pile of consequences, the real-world marketplace decided to pull a complete 180. Reports coming out of PBS and Billboard painted a shocking picture instead of flatlining Wallen's sales numbers. Didn't just hold the line, they exploded, skyrocketing by an unbelievable 1,220%. Just let that insane statistic sink in for a moment. We saw his streaming figures leap up by more than 60%, and that massive double album, Dangerous, camped out at the #1 position on the Billboard 200 chart for 10 solid weeks in a row. You have to grasp the nuance here. This wasn't merely a fan base showing solidarity. This was a textbook example of the controversy reward loop operating at maximum capacity within our fractured attention-based economy. Whenever the establishment powers the big record labels, the glitzy award ceremonies, and the executives running radio attempt to punish a performer, they end up accidentally turning that person into a martyr figure. For a huge segment of the country listening public, purchasing a Morgan Wallen album transformed into an act of rebellion, a way to flip the bird to the very industry gatekeepers we dissected earlier. In reality, the friction didn't kill the vibe, it actually manufactured the demand. Every step the music industry took to back away from him only made his diehard supporters feel like they needed to double down and embrace him even tighter. This dynamic birthed a strange disconnect where corporations are desperate to keep things advertiser-friendly while the listeners are voting with their cash to shout that they could not care less about the establishment's moral rulebook. But hold on, because the situation becomes even more surreal. Essentially, this trend has educated the music business on a dark new truth. Public accountability has morphed into a massive profit-generating event. If an artist can just weather the storm for the initial 48 hours of a PR disaster, the analytics indicate they will likely emerge on the other side richer and more renowned than they ever were pre-scandal. It is the ultimate paradox. While the corporate side hands out punishments for the behaviour, the ecosystem itself, how we consume, stream and debate music, actively incentivises it. This raises a nagging question that haunts me whenever I consider Willie Nelson's somewhat diluted criticism of the situation. If the marketplace is financially rewarding outrage and conflict, does the industry even possess the power to effectively discipline bad behaviour anymore? Or have they simply constructed a monster of a system that has slipped completely out of their grasp? Is it even possible for fans to separate the art from the artist, when the controversy itself is the very fuel rocketing them up the sales charts? When you buy that album, are you genuinely supporting the music, or has the transaction just become another method of planting your flag in the ongoing culture wars? But here is the critical detail you need to know. Although Wallen is the poster child for this modern profit from punishment phenomenon, there is a significantly darker older tale that demonstrates the industry has not always been so forgiving to artists caught in the crossfire. Here is where the plot twists. Our next entry isn't labelled evil because of their own actions, but rather because of the brutal things the industry inflicted upon them. This serves as the historical blueprint for exactly how Nashville demands and enforces total submission, and in stark contrast to the windfall we just witnessed with Morgan Wallen, this group didn't receive a reward loop. They were hit with a comprehensive systematic erasure that lingered for decades. To really comprehend the mechanics of the machine when it decides to destroy a career, we must revisit the night the music effectively died for 3 women who were at the time the biggest stars on the planet. Let's move to number 2, the prime example of industry evil. The system found its opportunity in London on March 10th, 2003. The chicks known back then as the Dixie Chicks were commanding the stage at the legendary Shepherd's Bush Empire. At that precise moment in time, they reigned supreme as the single largest group in the history of country music. Having moved tens of millions of units, they seemed completely invincible, untouchable titans of the genre. Then Natalie Maines leaned into the microphone and confessed to the crowd that she felt ashamed that the President of the United States hailed from her home state of Texas. It was merely a 12-word sentiment expressed on foreign soil. In our current landscape of 2026, that is just a standard Tuesday rant on social media. But back in 2003, it acted as the detonator for the most ruthless, efficient career assassination in American music history. And here is the truly shocking part of it all. The Chicks land at spot number 2 on this list, not because they committed some atrocity, but because they became the sacrificial lamb the industry required to make a point. They served as the terrifying warning shot that Nashville fired to keep every other artist terrified and in line for the next 20 years. You have likely seen the old news clips of angry people crushing CDs under bulldozers. It has all the visual markers of a grassroots fan uprising, does it not? But there is a catch. When you actually dig into the documents such as the Radio and Records Hot Facts, dated March 18th, 2003, a much more sinister narrative begins to emerge. This wasn't simply a case of fans losing their temper, it was a coordinated top-down purge. In a matter of days, their radio presence plummeted by over 74%. Massive radio conglomerates didn't merely pull their latest single from rotation, they completely blacklisted their entire discography. They were essentially attempting to edit the history books to make it look like the Chicks never existed in the first place. And listen to this, there is a compelling academic study by a researcher named Gabriel Rossman who analysed this specific event. He discovered that executing a blacklist does not require one evil mastermind plotting in a shadowy room. All it requires is a handful of gigantic corporations collectively deciding that silencing a voice is the safest bet for their bottom line. It is a dispersed kind of gutlessness that functions dangerously, much like a loaded weapon in the wrong hands. The executives realised they possessed the nuclear option, the ability to terminate a superstar's livelihood overnight, if they dared stray from the sanitised, radio-friendly lane pioneered by folks like Chet Atkins. The atmosphere of fear was so suffocatingly toxic that it nearly dragged down Willie Nelson, a man who is practically the logo of the genre itself. Back in 2004, Time magazine highlighted a controversial track Willie put out titled "Whatever Happened to Peace on Earth." Here was a guy pushing 71, an absolute living icon, yet he faced genuine questions about whether he feared the same blacklisting fate that completely crushed the Chicks. Pause for a moment and really process the insanity of that dynamic. The corporate apparatus had grown so vindictive that the very artist who rescued country music in the 70s felt the crosshairs on his back simply for questioning a military conflict. This is precisely why the Chicks land at spot number 2 on our shock list. Their story demonstrates that Nashville demands more than just hit records. It demands total, unwavering submission to the narrative. If Morgan Wallen is the poster child for the industry's forgiveness cycle, the Chicks illustrate the total erasure protocol. It exposes a chilling hypocrisy within the business. If your scandalous behaviour lines the pockets of the powers that be, you are rocketed to the top. However, if your controversy challenges the established corporate status quo, you are systematically scrubbed from existence. Ask yourself, should any corporate entity possess the authority to delete an artist's legacy over a single political statement? Does that actually guard the culture? Or is it simply guarding the gatekeeper's bonuses? Once you understand that the label execs can turn a household name into a ghost, you realise who actually holds the leash. This leads us directly to the final entry on our list, the ultimate power player. This is a force you cannot cancel, you cannot boycott, and it will never issue a Notes app apology for its sins. It is the entity truly calling the shots in 2026. Entry number 1, the Phantom Artist. If you were expecting a specific celebrity name to drop here, a villain with a face you can hate, prepare for a harsh reality check. You cannot stare this monster down because it does not possess a human soul. The single most destructive force in country music today is the incentive structure itself. It is the invisible operating system of the modern music business, replacing the heart of human songwriting with cold calculated algorithms designed to monetize your outrage. Reflect on the journey we have taken through this countdown and connect the dots. We witnessed how Chet Atkins began the process by polishing the rough edges off the music to make it palatable for a general audience. We watched that philosophy mutate into Toby Keith's formula for patriotic cash grabs, which eventually evolved into Jason Aldean utilising social friction as a promotional strategy. And we saw the endgame, a system that handsomely rewards profitable scandals like Wallen's while holding up the chicks as a severed head on a pike to warn off independent thinkers. But here is the kicker. These are not 6 isolated incidents or random events. They are 6 distinct gears turning inside the exact same grinder. Sociologists like Gabriel Rossman describe this when analysing how industries police themselves. There is no smoke-filled room with villains plotting the death of art. All you need is a framework where every radio programmer and playlist curator is financially motivated to pick the safe money-making track over the honest one. It is control without a commander, a decentralised tyranny. If a track that ignites a flame war in the comments section generates 10 times the revenue of a ballad about genuine heartbreak, the algorithm will inevitably order more flame wars. The system is indifferent to the melody. It worships high-velocity user engagement. Now contrast that machine logic with Willie Nelson. Reading those recent retrospectives in The New Yorker, or time you are looking at a man who stands as the control group for a humanity the industry cannot simulate. Willie's entire worldview rests on the belief that music functions as a bridge between people. He dedicated his life to forcing long-haired hippies and conservative rednecks to share a beer in the same dance hall. But hold on, it gets darker. The modern machine actively despises that concept. Bridges are difficult to monetize, but walls are cash cows. If you can persuade a demographic that they are under siege and that their cultural survival depends on supporting a specific artist's controversy, you have manufactured a loyal customer for life. That is the right at the core of the industry in 2026. The corporate machine has figured out how to mass produce the aesthetic of authenticity. It discovered it can strip mine the outlaw attitude that Willie pioneered and stitch it into a mass market Halloween costume. They sell you the fantasy of rebellion while guaranteeing you remain docile enough never to threaten their profit margins. It is a software update for culture designed to keep the wound infected, because as long as we are fighting over which singer is the villain, we ignore the system engineering the fight. Willie Nelson refuses to read out a list of enemies because he understands that is just throwing gasoline on the fire. He has spent over 70 years demonstrating that the song itself is the truth and everything surrounding it is just diluted static. The industry profits from the split, Willie profits from the gathering. One of those models is a castle built on a swamp. The other is a 93-year-old legend strumming a guitar named Trigger that is literally held together by the memories of the songs played upon it. So I leave you with this question: what kind of art would you actually support if the algorithm stopped making the decision for you? Is it truly about the art of storytelling, the raw musical talent, or the sense of community we crave? Or are we all just too hooked on the drama and arguments to ever hit the pause button? Because as long as we keep feeding the division, the industry machine does not even have to search for new bad guys. It will just keep churning them out on an assembly line, and that leads us to the final burning question of this entire saga. When the dust settles, did we actually identify 6 villainous performers, or were these actually 6 distinct warnings that Willie has been trying to show us all along? He did not just hand us a hit list of enemies. He essentially gave us a blueprint of the corrupt machine itself. Number 2 represented the standard template they use for punishment. And number 1 was the entire system that cashes in on your division. Which of these entries felt the most unjustified and which one was undeniably true? Tell me your personal ranking in the comments section.